The suction catheter gorged on dark, heavy blood, making a sound like a drowning animal. It was the only sound in Trauma Bay 4 that wasn't a scream or a machine alarm. The boy on the table was 17, his chest a ruin of torn asphalt and shattered ribs, the result of a motorcycle meeting a guardrail at 90 miles an hour. Pressure dropping, 60/40. "I can't see the source," Dr. Vane shouted, his voice cracking with the high-pitched panic of a man who hated losing more than he loved saving. Vane adjusted his rimless glasses with a wrist that bore a platinum dive watch worth more than the nurse's annual salary, a watch that had never touched salt water. "Someone get in here and clamp this." Jarek Solano moved before the order was finished. He didn't run. Jarek never ran. He moved with a heavy, rhythmic shuffle, favoring his left leg, a gait that made him look like an exhausted janitor rather than a medical professional. He stepped up to the table, his eyes locking onto the bubbling wound in the boy's axilla. He didn't look at the face. You never look at the face when the Reaper is in the room. Jarek's hand, scarred and rough like handled leather, dove into the open cavity. He didn't use a clamp. He used 2 fingers, finding the severed artery by feel in the blind mess of hamburger meat and bone. He pinched. The fountain of blood stopped instantly. The monitors stabilized. The boy's heart rate leveled out. For a second, the room was silent. Jarek stood there, his graying temples glistening with sweat, his eyes fixed on the wound, his body unnaturally still. He didn't breathe heavy. He didn't blink. He just held the line. "Get your hands out of my patient, Solano." Dr. Vane shoved Jarek's shoulder hard enough to make the older man stumble back onto his bad leg. Vane jammed a hemostat into the cavity, clamping the vessel Jarek had already located. "I asked for a nurse, not the help," Vane sneered, not looking up as he began to suture. "Go empty the catheters. Stick to what you're qualified for. If you touch a patient again without a direct order, I'll have your license shredded before the end of the shift." Jarek said nothing. He didn't defend the save. He didn't point out that the boy would have bled out in the 5 seconds it took Vane to find the bleeder. He simply nodded, his face a mask of granite, and turned away. As he walked to the waste disposal, his left leg dragged slightly, a heavy thud scrape on the linoleum that announced his presence long before he was seen. This was the hierarchy at Street Jude's medical center. You were either a god in a white coat, or you were furniture. And Jarek Solano, the 40-year-old LPN who had transferred in 3 weeks ago with a redacted employment history and a limp, was less than furniture. He was a stain they hadn't figured out how to scrub away yet. The break room smelled of stale coffee and resentment. Jarek sat in the far corner, the one nearest the door, his back pressed against the wall. He never sat with his back to the room. He was eating a cold sandwich wrapped in wax paper, his movements slow and deliberate. At the center table, Mina Kovic was trying to argue with the charge nurse. Mina was young, frantic, and wore her heart on her sleeve and in her hair, which was currently tied back with a frantic knot of shoelaces because she'd lost her scrunchie again. She pulled nervously at the cuticle of her thumb, a habit that left her fingers constantly raw. He stabilized the pressure. "Aris," Mina said, her voice low, trying not to draw attention from the other residents. "I saw it. Jarek found the bleeder before you even got the suction in." Dr. Vane laughed, a sharp, barking sound. He was leaning against the counter, cleaning his glasses with a microfiber cloth he kept in a dedicated pocket. "Mina, sweetheart, the man barely speaks English. He's a mute washout who probably got his LPN at a strip mall. He panicked and stuck his hand in a wound. That's not skill. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen." "He doesn't panic," Mina muttered, ripping a piece of skin off her thumb. "He's quiet. There's a difference." "He's slow," Vane corrected, holding his glasses up to the light to check for smudges. "He walks like he's dragging a ball and chain. He freezes when people yell. He's dead weight, and in this ER, dead weight kills people. I'm writing him up for insubordination." Jarek heard every word. He didn't look up from his sandwich. He took a bite, chewed 30 times, and swallowed. His right hand, resting on the table, began to tremor a fine, high-frequency vibration. He placed his other hand over it, pressing down until the shaking stopped. He didn't care about the write-up. He didn't care about Vane's ego. He cared that the boy in Trauma 4 was alive. That was the penance. That was the only thing that kept the ghosts at bay. Every life saved was a drop of water on a forest fire that had been burning inside him for 6 years. He finished his meal, crumpled the wax paper into a perfect sphere, and stood up. The pain in his leg flared, a hot wire running from his ankle to his hip, a souvenir from a place that didn't exist on any tourist map. He ignored it. As he walked past Vane, the doctor didn't even shift his weight. He just smirked, the smell of expensive sandalwood cologne wafting off him like a toxic cloud. Floors need mopping in Bay too, Solano, Vane said. Try not to hurt yourself. Jarek paused. For a microsecond, the air in the room changed. The temperature seemed to drop. Jarek's eyes, usually cast down, lifted. They were dark, hollow, and terrifyingly flat. He looked at Vane's throat, then his eyes. It was a look of assessment, the way a butcher looks at a side of beef, calculating the cuts. Then, the mask slipped back into place. Jarek dipped his head. Yes, doctor, he whispered. The voice was gravel, unused and rough. He walked out, the thud scrape of his boot fading down the hall. Creep, Vane muttered, finally putting his glasses back on. The shift ground on. The ER was a meat grinder, chewing up the sick and spitting out the stabilized or the dead. Jarek moved through it like a ghost. He changed bedpans for the elderly stroke victim in bed 6 with a tenderness that made her weep. He held the hand of a heroin addict coming down in bed 9, sitting in silence for 20 minutes while the man screamed, anchoring him to reality with nothing but a grip that felt like steel. He was invisible. He was the help. Around 0200 hours, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sound, it was a pressure. The air grew heavy. The radios at the nurses' station began to chatter with a frantic, overlapping urgency that signaled catastrophe. Minakovic ran past Jarek, her shoelace hair tie coming undone. Mass casualty event, she said, breathless. 7-car pileup on the interstate, including a prison transport bus and a chemical tanker. We're getting the overflow. Overflow? Jarek asked, looking up from a cart he was restocking. Mercy General is full. We're getting the criticals they can't take. ETA 4 minutes. Dr. Vane stormed into the center of the pit, clapping his hands. All right, listen up. I want trauma bays, 1 through 4 prepped. We are going to have severe burns, blunt force, and potential chemical exposure. I want the residents on point. Solano, Jarek stepped forward. You are on supply, Vane barked, pointing a manicured finger at the storage closet. Do not touch a patient. Do not assess a patient. You run gauze, you run saline, and you stay out of the way of the real doctors. If I see you near a table, you're fired on the spot. Clear? Clear, Jarek said. The doors to the ambulance bay burst open. It wasn't just noise. It was a wall of sound. Paramedics shouting, gurneys rattling, patients screaming. The smell hit them first: diesel fuel, burnt rubber, and the copper tang of blood. Male, 40s, crushed pelvis. A paramedic yelled, wheeling a stretcher into Bay 1. Female, unknown age, severe burns to face and chest, airway compromised. Another shouted, heading for Bay 2. Chaos detonated. Jarek retreated to the supply wall, his hands moving automatically to grab IV kits and fluids. He watched the room disintegrate. Vane was shouting orders that were getting lost in the noise. Residents were hesitating. The system was breaking under the load. Then, Jarek saw it. They wheeled in a man in an orange jumpsuit, handcuffed to the rails. A prison guard, bloodied but walking, was yelling at the staff. "Watch him! He's dangerous!" The prisoner was gasping, his face turning a dark, bruised purple. A resident was trying to listen to his chest, looking confused. "Breath sounds are absent on the left," the resident yelled. "Drop a tube!" Vane screamed from the next bay. "Intubate him!" Jarek watched from 10 feet away. He saw the prisoner's neck veins distended like ropes. He saw the deviation of the trachea, pushing hard to the right. He saw the way the chest wasn't just not moving, it was expanding, tight as a drum. It wasn't just a collapsed lung. It was a tension pneumothorax that was seconds away from stopping the heart. And the resident was reaching for a laryngoscope to intubate. If they intubated now, the positive pressure would kill him instantly. The air would have nowhere to go but to crush the heart. Jarek's hand started to shake. He clenched it into a fist. Stay out of the way. Do not touch a patient. The resident tilted the prisoner's head back. The prisoner's eyes rolled up, the whites showing. He was dying. Vane was busy with the burn victim. No one else saw. Jarek looked at the resident, then at the dying man. The text of the rulebook screamed in his head. Stay in your lane. But the other voice, the one that had been forged in sand and fire, the one that knew the weight of a body bag, whispered louder. The mission comes first. Jarek dropped the armful of saline bags. They hit the floor with a heavy, wet slap. He didn't shuffle this time. He moved with a terrifying, predatory speed, the limp vanishing as adrenaline overrode the damaged nerve. He crossed the 10 feet in 2 strides. Get away, the guard shouted, reaching for his baton. Jarek didn't even look at him. He shoved the resident aside with a force that sent the young doctor sprawling into a crash cart. Hey! Vane roared, looking up. Solano, what are you doing? Jarek ignored them all. He didn't reach for a scalpel. There was no time. He reached for the 14-gauge decompression needle on the tray. He ripped the cap off with his teeth. Security! Vane screamed. Get him off the patient! The guard lunged, grabbing Jarek's shoulder. Jarek didn't strike back. He simply dropped his center of gravity and drove his elbow back. A short, controlled check that knocked the wind out of the guard without breaking ribs. He didn't stop moving. He slammed the needle into the prisoner's chest, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Hiss. The sound of escaping air was audible even over the chaos. The prisoner's chest deflated. He sucked in a massive, ragged breath. The purple hue began to drain from his face. Jarek stood up, the needle still in his hand, his chest heaving. The room went silent. The guard was wheezing on the floor. The resident was staring from the crash cart, and Dr. Aris Vane was standing 5 feet away, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. You're done, Vane whispered, his voice trembling with fury. You are done in this hospital. Get out. Now. Jarek looked at the prisoner, who was now breathing. He looked at the needle in his hand. He placed it gently on the tray. He would have died if you intubated, Jarek said softly. I don't care if you saved the Pope, Vane hissed, stepping closer, invading Jarek's space. You assaulted a resident. You assaulted an officer. You are a liability. Get out of my trauma bay before I have you arrested. Jarek looked at Vane. For a moment, he thought about explaining. He thought about telling him about the 300 men he'd patched up in the back of a shaking bird under enemy fire. He thought about showing him the medal hidden in his sock drawer, but he just nodded. The limp returned. The shoulders slumped. Yes, doctor, Jarek said. He turned to leave, but before he could reach the door, the red phone on the wall, the one that hadn't rung in 5 years, the one directly linked to the regional military command, began to scream. The red phone was a Cold War relic, a rotary dial monstrosity bolted to the wall behind the charge desk. It was encased in a dusty plexiglass box that hadn't been opened since the Gulf War. When it rang, the sound wasn't a digital chirp. It was a physical, jarring bell that drilled into the teeth of everyone in the triage bay. 1 ring. 2. The silence that followed was absolute. The moans of the car crash victims, the beep of monitors, the rustle of gowns, it all evaporated. Even Dr. Vane froze, his hand halfway to a suture tray, his eyes snapping to the nurse's station. The charge nurse, a veteran named Barb who had seen everything from gang wars to floods, stared at the phone like it was a live cobra. Her hand trembled as she lifted the receiver. Trauma command, she whispered. Her face drained of color instantly. She listened for 3 seconds, her eyes widening until they showed white all around the iris. She slammed the phone down and screamed, her voice cracking with a terror that cut through the room. "Clear the bay. Everyone out. Code black. Inbound in 60 seconds. Jerick Solano stopped. He was 3 steps from the exit, his hand on the push bar. He felt the vibration before he heard the sound. It started as a thrum in the soles of his boots, a low-frequency shudder that rattled the glass in the sliding doors. He knew that frequency. He knew the specific, chop-heavy rhythm of the rotor blades. It wasn't a medevac. It wasn't the local news chopper. It was military. Heavy lift. "What is going on?" Vane shouted, abandoning his patient to stride toward the center of the room. "I didn't authorize a transfer. Who is landing on my pad?" "They aren't using the pad," Barb yelled, grabbing a clipboard and throwing it aside. "They're landing on the lawn. Move! Get the gurneys back!" The roar hit them like a physical blow. The double doors to the ambulance bay blew open, forced inward by a sudden, violent gust of wind, dust, dead leaves, and grit blasted into the sterile hallway, coating the pristine floors. The lights flickered as the power grid surged, fighting the massive vibration shaking the building's foundation. Jerick turned slowly. The instinct to leave was overridden by the muscle memory of combat. When that sound hits, you don't run away. You dig in. You assess. His eyes narrowed, scanning the chaotic swirl of debris outside the open doors. Through the dust cloud, a dark shape descended. It was massive, blacked out, devoid of civilian markings. A Navy MH-60 Seahawk. It didn't touch down gently. It slammed onto the manicured grass of the hospital courtyard, its wheels sinking deep into the soft earth. The rotors didn't spin down. They stayed at full pitch, screaming like banshees, whipping the bushes flat against the ground. The side door of the helicopter slid open before the wheels settled. Men jumped out. They weren't paramedics. They wore multicam trousers, unevenly tucked shirts, and heavy plate carriers. No patches, no names. They moved with a violence of action that made the ER security guards look like mall cops. They didn't run. They surged, a coordinated wedge of aggression moving a stretcher between them. "We need a trauma team! Now!" the lead man screamed. He was a giant, beard thick with dust, his eyes wild behind ballistic eyewear. He dragged the stretcher through the automatic doors, the wheels skidding on the linoleum. Vane stepped forward, puffing his chest out, trying to reclaim his kingdom. "You can't just barge in here with—" "Move!" the giant roared, shoving Vane aside with a forearm that looked like a cured ham. The force of it sent the doctor stumbling back into a supply cart. They wheeled the stretcher into Trauma Bay 1, kicking the brake levers down so hard the metal groaned. The patient was young, maybe 25, but he looked aged by agony. He was stripped to the waist, his chest a map of purple bruising and shrapnel tears. But the real horror was his leg. A tourniquet was cranked so tight above the knee that the skin was white, but blood was still oozing, dark and thick. "Blast injury," the lead operator shouted. "IED training accident. High-yield explosive. He's got internal fragmentation. Pressure is 70 palp. We lost the pulse twice in the bird." Vane scrambled back to the table, his face flushed with humiliation and adrenaline. "I am the attending physician. You will step back and let me work." "Then work," the operator spit back. "Save him." Vane looked at the mess of the soldier's body. He grabbed a trauma shears and cut the remaining fabric of the pant leg. "Get a line in. 2 large bore IVs. Type and cross for 6 units. The nurses scrambled. Mina Kovic was there, trying to find a vein in the soldier's collapsed arm. She missed. Her hands were shaking too hard. The presence of the operators, these looming, armed men smelling of aviation fuel and sweat, was suffocating. "I can't get a stick," Mina cried. "Drill him," Vane ordered. "IO in the shoulder." Jerick stood in the shadow of the doorway. He shouldn't be here. He was fired. He was a liability. But his feet wouldn't move. He watched the monitor. The heart rate was climbing 140, 150. The rhythm was erratic. He's throwing PVCs, Jarek whispered to himself. He's crashing, Vane yelled. Epinephrine, 1 milligram. No, the lead operator shouted, leaning over the table. He doesn't need epi. He needs volume. He's bled out. I am the doctor, Vane screamed, his voice cracking. Security, get these men out of my trauma bay. The security guards hesitated. They looked at the operators, who had their hands resting near the waistbands where sidearms were likely concealed. The guards wisely decided to stay by the wall. His belly is distended, Vane announced, pressing on the soldier's abdomen. He's got internal bleeding. We need to get him to CT. He won't survive the elevator ride, the operator growled. Fix him here. I can't operate in a trauma bay, Vane argued, his hands slick with blood. He needs a sterile field. He needs an oar, the monitor screamed. A flat, high-pitched tone. Asystole. Code blue, Mina screamed, starting compressions. She leaped onto a stool and began pumping the soldier's chest. The rhythm was frantic. The room descended into pure panic. Vane was shouting for drugs. The operators were shouting for results. Jarek watched the soldier's face. It was grey, the color of wet ash. He looked at the injury pattern, the shrapnel in the chest, the distended belly, the crushed leg. But something was wrong. The way the veins in the neck were bulging again, just like the prisoner. But Vane had checked the lungs. Breath sounds were equal. It wasn't a pneumothorax. Jarek's eyes scanned the body. He looked lower, the tourniquet on the leg. It was high, near the groin, but the blood wasn't stopping. It was dark, non-pulsatile, venous, and then he saw it. A small, almost invisible puncture wound in the right side of the neck, just above the clavicle. No bleeding, just a small, puckered hole. Air embolus. The blast hadn't just torn him up. It had forced air into the venous system. The compressions Mina was doing were just churning the air into a froth in the right ventricle. They were vapor-locking the heart. If they continued compressions, they would kill him. The air bubble would move to the lungs and choke off the pulmonary artery. Jarek felt the pull. That magnetic, suicidal pull to intervene. He looked at Vane, who was now preparing to shock a heart that had no blood in it. Clear! Vane yelled, charging the paddles. Don't shock him. The voice wasn't Jarek's. It was the lead operator. He grabbed Vane's wrist. He's not in a shockable rhythm. Look at the monitor. It's flatline. Get off me, Vane shrieked. I'm calling the police. The soldier was dead. Technically, the electrical activity was gone. The mechanical activity was gone. Jarek took a step forward. His bad leg dragged. Thud scrape. He knew what needed to be done. It was a maneuver they didn't teach in nursing school. They didn't teach it in med school either. Not really. It was battlefield medicine. Dirty, desperate, and dangerous. The Durant maneuver. Position the patient left lateral decubitus. Trendelenburg position. Trap the air in the apex of the right ventricle. Then aspirate directly through the chest wall. It was insanity. Vane would never do it. Vane wouldn't even know what it was. The lead operator looked up, his eyes scanning the room, desperate, looking for anyone who wasn't panicking. His eyes locked onto Jarek. For a second, time suspended. The operator saw the LPN in the stained scrubs. He saw the grey hair. He saw the stillness. He saw the way Jarek wasn't looking at the monitor, but at the neck wound. The operator's eyes narrowed. He recognized the look. It was the 1,000-yard stare, the look of a man who had seen the elephant and lived. You, the operator barked, pointing at Jarek. You see it. What is it? Vane whipped around. Don't talk to him. He's a janitor. He's fired. Jarek didn't look at Vane. He looked at the operator. Air embolus, Jarek said. His voice was low, but it carried through the noise like a bell. Right, internal jugular entry. Vane is churning it into froth. 1 minute to brain death. Vane laughed, a hysterical, breathless sound. Air embolus? From a leg wound? You're delusional. Get out. The operator didn't laugh. He looked at the small hole in the neck that Jarek had spotted from 10 feet away. He looked back at Jarek. "Can you fix it?" the operator asked. "I need a central line kit and a 50cc syringe," Jarek said. "And I need him on his left side. Now, do it," the operator commanded. "No." Vane stepped between them. "I will not allow an unlicensed nurse to perform an invasive procedure on a United States serviceman. I am in charge here." The operator didn't hesitate. He drew his sidearm, a suppressed Sig Sauer, from his waistband. He didn't point it at Vane. He placed it on the crash cart with a heavy metallic clack. "He's not a serviceman," the operator said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "He's the Admiral's son, and if he dies because of your ego, I will dismantle this hospital brick by brick." He looked at Jarek. "You have the floor." Vane froze. The threat was palpable. The air in the room turned to ice. Jarek moved. He limped past Vane, brushing shoulders with the doctor. He felt the heat of Vane's rage, but it meant nothing. He reached the table. "Mina, stop compressions. Help me turn him." Mina hesitated, looking at Vane, then at the gun, then at Jarek. "Do it, Mina," Jarek said gently. She nodded. Together, they rolled the dead boy onto his left side. Jarek ripped open the central line kit. His hands, usually trembling when at rest, became rock steady. He wasn't a nurse anymore. He wasn't a janitor. He was back in the sandbox. And there was work to do. The needle slid between the 4th and 5th ribs with a sickening, gritty pop. Jarek didn't look at the monitor. He didn't look at the gun on the crash cart. He watched the barrel of the 60cc syringe, his thumb pulled back on the plunger, a slow, hydraulic draw against the vacuum of the chest cavity. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The syringe remained empty. "He's killing him!" Dr. Vane screamed, lunging forward, his face distorted with panic and opportunity. "He's piercing the heart wall. Security! Tackle him!" The 2 security guards shifted, their boots squeaking on the blood-slicked floor. They looked at the massive SEAL operator, Kalen Thorne, who stood like a sentinel between them and the table. Thorne didn't raise his voice. He just shifted his weight, his hand hovering near the crash cart where his sidearm lay. The guards stopped. Then, the searing hissed. It wasn't blood that filled the plastic cylinder. It was pink foam, a slurry of bright red arterial spray mixed with air bubbles, churning like boiling soap. "Air!" Minakovich gasped, her hand still resting on the soldier's cold ankles. He got the air. Jarek kept pulling. 10 cc's. 20. The foam kept coming, sucked out of the apex of the right ventricle where it had been vapor-locking the pump. "Rhythm change," Mina shouted, looking at the monitor. The flat, high-pitched whine of a systole stuttered. A jagged green line shot across the screen, then another, then a rhythmic, thumping beep, beep, beep. "Sinus tachycardia," Jarek whispered. "Rate 130. Pressure," Mina fumbled for the cuff. "Rising. 80/50. 90/60. Jarek withdrew the needle in one smooth motion, slapping a sterile occlusive dressing over the puncture site before the blood could follow the needle out. He tossed the syringe into the biohazard bin. It landed with a heavy thud, the pink foam settling inside. He stepped back. His hands, steady as stone during the procedure, immediately began to tremble again. He clasped them behind his back, hiding the weakness. "He's back," Jarek said to the room, "but he needs the ore. He needs a vascular surgeon to repair the jugular vein and the tear in the mesentery. I just bought you an hour." The silence in the room was heavy, thick with the smell of copper and ozone. Then, Dr. Aris Vane shattered it. "Get away from that patient," Vane said, his voice low and trembling with a poisonous mix of relief and fury. He walked up to Jarek, stopping inches from his face. "You unauthorized, unlicensed piece of trash. Do you have any idea what you just did?" "I saved his life," Jarek said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "You performed a pericardiocentesis and a ventricular aspiration without a license, without an order, and without imaging," Vane hissed. That is assault with a deadly weapon. That is malpractice. I don't care that he has a pulse. You are finished." Vane turned to the security guards, his authority returning now that the immediate shadow of death had passed. "Escort Mr. Solano to the holding room. Call the police. I want him charged. And call Administrator Voss. Tell her we have a rogue employee assaulting patients." "Wait," Thorne rumbled. The SEAL stepped forward, his boots crunching on broken glass. He looked at the monitor, then at Jarek. "He saved the kid. You were going to shock a flatline." "This is a hospital, Sergeant," Vane snapped, adjusting his glasses, regaining his arrogance. "We have laws. We have protocols. This man is a janitor with a nursing certificate he probably bought online. He got lucky. I will not have my operating room turned into a cowboy show. Security, remove him." The guards moved in. This time, Thorne didn't stop them. He couldn't. The immediate threat to life was over, and the weight of institutional authority was crashing back down. One guard grabbed Jarek's arm. Jarek didn't resist. He didn't pull away. He let them twist his arm behind his back, the joint popping painfully. "Easy," Jarek grunted, the pain in his bad leg flaring as they forced him to march. "Get him out," Vane yelled. "And scrub this bay. I want this patient in ore, 1 in 5 minutes. I'll do the repair myself." As Jarek was shoved toward the double doors, he locked eyes with Thorne. The SEAL was watching him closely, not with gratitude, but with suspicion. Thorne's eyes dropped to Jarek's hands specifically, to the way Jarek had taped the dressing. It wasn't the standard Hospital H taping. It was a star lock pattern, a friction knot used to secure field dressings in high-vibration environments, like helicopters or Humvees. Jarek saw the recognition flicker in Thorne's eyes. He quickly looked away, dipping his head, letting the guard shove him through the doors. "Don't kill him, Vane," Jarek whispered as the doors swung shut. The hospital holding room was a glorified closet with a flickering fluorescent light and a single metal chair bolted to the floor. Jarek sat, his hands cuffed in front of him, a courtesy from the guard who had seen the save. He closed his eyes. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the dark, cold sludge of memory. The sand, the heat, the boy in the village who looked just like the Admiral's son. The decision. He shook his head, physically scattering the image. He couldn't go back there. Not now. The door opened. It wasn't the police. It was Administrator Corinne Voss. She was a razor-thin woman in a charcoal power suit, her hair pulled back so tight it pulled at the corners of her eyes. She held a tablet, like a shield. "Doctor." Vane stood behind her, looking smug. "Mr. Solano," Voss said, her voice dry as parchment. "Doctor, Vane informs me that you assaulted a resident, assaulted a security officer, and performed invasive surgery on a VIP patient without authorization. The patient had an air embolus," Jarek said, his voice raspy. "Dr. Vane missed it." "I did not miss it," Vane snapped, stepping into the room. "It was a speculative diagnosis. You gambled with a patient's life. We have reviewed the security footage." Voss cut in, silencing Vane with a raised hand. "The optics are difficult. However, the legal liability is absolute. You are terminated, effective immediately. Street. Judes will be pressing charges for criminal negligence and practicing medicine without a license. We cannot have vigilantism in our ER." She placed a termination notice on the metal table. "Sign this. It admits fault. If you sign, we might advise the district attorney to seek probation rather than prison time." Jarek looked at the paper. It was a trap, a way to save the hospital's insurance premiums. "And the boy?" Jarek asked. "Is he in surgery?" "Dr. Vane is scrubbing in now," Voss said. "Not that it concerns you anymore." Jarek's stomach dropped. Vane was a cosmetic surgeon who took ER shifts for the adrenaline and the paycheck. He was good with skin. He was decent with fractures, but a vascular repair of the jugular and mesentery? On a blast victim with coagulopathy? "He can't do it," Jarek said, standing up. The cuffs rattled. The boy has DIC, disseminated intravascular coagulation. His blood isn't clotting. If vein cuts him open without cryoprecipitate and factor 7 on board, the boy will bleed out on the table." Vane laughed. "I have been a surgeon for 12 years, Solano. I think I know how to handle a bleeder. Sit down." "He's not a bleeder," Jarek shouted, the mask of the quiet nurse finally cracking. "He's a sieve." The blast wave shredded his clotting factors. "You need to run a TEG analysis before you cut. If you open him up, you kill him." "That is enough," Voss shouted. "Security! Take him to the precinct!" The guards stepped forward to hold Jarek up. Suddenly, the building shook again. It wasn't a helicopter this time. It was thunder. A massive, rolling boom that cracked directly overhead. The lights in the holding room flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. The emergency red lights kicked on, bathing the room in the color of blood. The door banged open. Mina Kovic stood there, backlit by the flashing red strobes of the hallway fire alarm. She was weeping. "Dr. Vane," she screamed. "Come quick! The patient, the Admiral's son." "What?" Vane demanded, spinning around. "I haven't even cut him yet." "He's crashing again," Mina yelled. "He's bleeding from his eyes. He's bleeding from the IV sites. And the helicopter team, they're freaking out." Jarek closed his eyes. "DIC. I told you. Get the lights back on," Voss shrieked, tapping furiously on her tablet. "The storm took the main grid," Mina cried. "The backup generators are lagging. The ore is dark." Vane looked at Voss, then at the door. For the first time, real fear crept into his eyes. He wasn't scared for the patient. He was scared of the failure. I need to stabilize him before transport," Vane stammered. "I can't operate in the dark." Heavy footsteps hammered down the hallway. Fast, tactical. Kalen Thorne appeared in the doorway, pushing Mina aside. He was covered in the patient's blood. It was soaked into his multicam trousers. He looked at Vane, then he looked at the cuffed man in the chair. Thorne ignored the administrator. He ignored the doctor. He walked straight to Jarek. He grabbed Jarek's scrub top and hauled him to his feet, bringing his face inches from Jarek's. "You said he needs a vascular repair," Thorne growled. "He does," Jarek said calmly. "The doctor says he can't do it. Not with the power out. Not with the bleeding." Thorne's eyes were wild, desperate. "The pilot says we can't lift off. The storm is zero visibility. We're grounded." Thorne pulled a knife from his belt. Voss screamed. Thorne didn't attack. He reached down and slashed the zip-tie cuffs on Jarek's wrists. "My medic is dead," Thorne said, his voice cracking with the weight of the confession. "He died in the bird on the way here. I don't have anyone else." He grabbed Jarek's wrist, his grip like a vice. "You called the air embolus. You called the clotting issue." Thorne paused, looking at the scar that ran from Jarek's hairline to his ear, a scar usually hidden by his hair, now exposed in the harsh emergency light. "Who are you?" Thorne whispered. Jarek rubbed his wrists. He looked at Vane, who was paralyzed by indecision. He looked at Voss, who was terrified. Then he looked at Thorne. "I'm the only chance he has," Jarek said. "Then move," Thorne commanded. "You're led." "I can't," Jarek said. He pointed to his leg. "I can't stand at a table for 4 hours. Not without a brace." Thorne looked at the leg. Then he looked at the roll of duct tape on his belt. "We'll fix it," Thorne said. "Walk." Jarek limped toward the door. As he passed Vane, he didn't stop. "Get out of my way, Aris," Jarek said. And for the first time, Dr. Vane moved. The roll of duct tape made a tearing sound that echoed in the pre-op anteroom like a zipper on a body bag. Kalen Thorne knelt on the linoleum, wrapping the silver adhesive tight around Jarek's left leg. He didn't ask where it hurt. He didn't ask about the injury. He wrapped the ankle, then spiraled up the calf, locking the knee into a semi-rigid brace of tension and friction. It was a field fix. Ugly, functional, and brutal. "Tight enough?" Thorne asked, not looking up. "Go tighter," Jarek said, gripping the edge of the sink, his knuckles white. "I need it to hold for 3 hours. If I collapse, he dies." Thorn gave the tape one final, vicious yank, cutting off the circulation just enough to numb the nerve pain, then ripped the end free. He stood up. He was 6'4", a tower of muscle and tactical nylon, but he looked at Jarek with the deferential hesitation of a junior enlisted man facing a field commander. "The boys are ready," Thorn said. "Whatever you need. We own this floor now." Jarek nodded, testing his weight. The leg held. It felt like a block of wood, dead and heavy, but stable. He turned to the scrub sink as he peeled off his stained scrub top to change into fresh, sterile blues. Thorn's eyes locked onto Jarek's back. The scars weren't surgical. They were burn patterns, keloid ridges that mapped out where a plate carrier had melted against skin, and right above the left scapula, a puckered, star-shaped crater, a sniper round. Through and through, Thorn went silent. He knew that wound pattern. He knew the caliber, and he knew that men who took 7.62 rounds to the upper thoracic and lived didn't end up emptying bedpans in civilian ERs unless they were hiding from God himself. "Who did you run with?" Thorn whispered. "Dev Grew? Cag?" Jarek pulled the fresh scrub top on, covering the map of his history. He turned, his face hard. "I'm just a nurse, Sergeant. Let's go." Operating Room 1 was a tomb. The storm had knocked out the main HVAC, and the backup generators were prioritizing the life support machines over the climate control. The room was sweltering, the air thick and stagnant. Emergency floodlights cast long, harsh shadows against the tiled walls, making the stainless steel instruments look black. Dr. Aris Vane stood by the anesthesia cart, his arms crossed, his face pale in the gloom. Administrator Voss watched from the observation gallery above, a silhouette behind the glass, phone pressed to her ear, likely calling the hospital lawyers. The patient, the Admiral's son, lay on the table. He was draped in blue, but the blue was turning dark red. The DIC disseminated intravascular coagulation was setting in. He was bleeding from his gums, his nose, and the IV sites. His blood had forgotten how to clot. He seeped through 2 layers of gauze, Vane announced as Jarek limped in. "You can't cut him, Solano. As soon as you make the incision, he'll exsanguinate. The blood bank is 20 minutes out because of the elevators. You're just accelerating his death." Jarek ignored him. He walked to the head of the table. He didn't check the monitors. He checked the boy's pupils. Fixed, dilated. "Time is tissue," Jarek murmured. He looked at Mina Kovic, who was trembling by the instrument tray. "Scalpel. 10 blade." "You don't have blood products," Vane shouted, stepping forward. "I forbid this. You cannot start a laparotomy with a hemoglobin of 5. Jarek looked at Thorn. "Walking blood bank. Now." Thorn nodded. He turned to the door and whistled. 2 other operators, the ones who had secured the hallway, walked in. They were already rolling up their sleeves. "What is this?" Vane stammered. "This is highly irregular. You can't just—" "Oh, negative," Thorn said, sitting on a stool next to the anesthesia machine. "Universal donor. Fresh whole blood. It has platelets. It has clotting factors. It has warmth, better than the frozen trash you keep in the basement." Jarek grabbed a collection line. He didn't wait for a phlebotomist. He spiked Thorn's vein with a practiced, fluid motion that made Vane flinch. He connected the line directly to the patient's central access. Direct transfusion. Warm, oxygenated blood flowing from the warrior to the dying boy. "Start the timer," Jarek said. "Mina, suction on standby. Vane, you're retracting." "I am not." "Retract or get out." Jarek's voice cracked like a whip. It wasn't a shout. It was a command frequency. The tone of a man used to being obeyed over the sound of gunfire. Vane grabbed the retractors, cowed by the sheer kinetic pressure in the room. Jarek cut. It wasn't the delicate, cosmetic incision Vane was famous for. It was a trauma entry. Fast, decisive, deep. Jarek opened the abdomen in 4 seconds. Blood welled up instantly, dark and angry. "Suction," Jarek ordered. Mina jammed the Yankawa into the cavity. The canister filled with a wet roar. "I can't see anything," Vane yelled, recoiling as warm blood splashed his expensive eyewear. "It's a soup in there. The liver is lacerated. The mesentery is shredded." Jarek didn't flinch. He didn't look with his eyes. He looked with his hands. He plunged his gloved hands into the hot, slick mess of the abdomen. He felt the liver. He felt the spleen. He felt the pulse of the aorta. There, a tear in the superior mesenteric artery. It was pumping blood into the belly faster than Thorn could replace it. "Kelly clamp," Jarek said, holding his hand deep in the wound. Mina slapped the metal into his palm. Jarek blindly navigated the clamp down. He had to feel the vessel, separate it from the nerve bundle, and clamp it without seeing it. 1 millimeter off, and he'd crush the boy's spine or kill the bowel. He closed his eyes. For a second, the ore vanished. He was back in the Black Hawk. The bird was spinning, smoke filling the cabin. The kid in his arms was screaming, "Don't let me die, Chief. Don't let me die." The memory tried to seize him. The guilt, the failure, the reason he had thrown his medals in the ocean and taken a job where he was told to just change bedpans. Not today, Jarek thought. Not this one. He visualized the anatomy. He felt the throb of the artery against his fingertip. Click. The clamp locked. "Suction clear," Jarek said. Mina vacuumed the remaining pool. The active geyser of blood had stopped. "My God," Vane whispered, leaning in, forgetting his ego for a split second. "You found it blind. That's a blind stick on the SMA." "We're not done," Jarek said, his voice flat. He's still oozing. The DIC is eating his clotting factors. "Thorn, switch out. Next, donor." Thorn unhooked the line, pressing gauze to his arm, and the next operator sat down. "The assembly line of life. We need to pack the liver," Jarek said. "Give me lap pads. All of them." As Jarek worked, packing the liver to create pressure, his movements began to change. The limp, heavy nurse was gone. He moved with a terrifying economy. He didn't ask for instruments by name anymore. He snapped his fingers in specific rhythms. Snap, forceps, snap, snap, suture. He was sewing the bowel tear now. A running whip stitch. Fast, ugly, watertight. "Where did you learn that stitch?" Vane asked, his voice trembling. "That's not textbook. That's a continuous locking mattress. We haven't used that since the Tet offensive." The older operator in the corner grunted. "Or Fallujah." Jarek didn't answer. He was watching the monitor. The heart rate was coming down. 120, 110. The blood pressure was holding. "He's stabilizing," Mina breathed, tears mixing with the sweat on her mask. "Jarek, you did it." "Pressure is holding," Jarek confirmed. "Let's wash him out and leave him open. Damage control, laparotomy only. We close the skin when the coagulopathy reverses." Suddenly, the lights died. The generator hiccuped. A transformer blew somewhere in the basement. The emergency floods strobed once and went black. Total darkness engulfed the room. The ventilator alarm began to scream a battery warning. "Flashlights!" Thorn roared. Beams of tactical white light cut through the dark. The operators had drawn their weapon lights, aiming them at the ceiling to diffuse the glow. But the darkness had shifted the dynamic. In the strobe light confusion, Jarek's sleeve had ridden up. Vane shined his phone light directly onto Jarek's arm to see the suture line. But the light caught the inside of Jarek's forearm. There was a tattoo. It was faded, scarred over, almost burned away. But it was there, a skeletal frog, a trident, and a number. Vane froze. He stared at the ink. The arrogance drained out of him, replaced by a cold, dawn-breaking realization of exactly who and what he had been spitting on for 3 weeks. "That's a team number," Vane whispered in the dark. You're not a nurse." Jarek didn't pull his arm back. He tied the final knot in the dark, feeling the silk thread snap tight. "I am a nurse, doctor," Jarek said, his voice coming from the shadows like a judgment. "And right now, I'm the lead surgeon. So unless you want to explain to the Admiral why his son died because you were looking at my tattoos, I suggest you cut the suture." Vane swallowed hard. His hand shook as he reached in with the scissors. "Cut," Jarek ordered. Snip. Pack him, Jarek said. We're moving him to ICU. Thorne, you and your boys are the transport team. No one else touches this gurney. Roger that, Chief, Thorne said. The title hung in the air. Chief, not Mr. Solano, not Jarek. As the lights flickered back on, dim, yellow, running on the tertiary battery, Jarek stepped back from the table. He was covered in blood up to his elbows. He looked exhausted. The adrenaline was dumping, and the pain in his leg was returning with a vengeance. He looked at the boy on the table. Alive. Good work, Mina, Jarek said softly. He turned to leave, but Vane blocked his path. The doctor looked different now, smaller. He looked at the tattoo again, then at Jarek's face. You can't leave, Vane said. The administrator called the police. They're waiting in the lobby. If you walk out those doors, they'll arrest you for practicing medicine without a license. Jarek pulled his mask down. He smiled. It was a sad, tired smile. Let them come, Jarek said. I'm done hiding. He pushed past Vane and limped toward the double doors. But as he reached for the handle, the doors swung open from the other side. It wasn't the police. It was a man in a dress uniform. 4 stars on the collar. He was flanked by 2 MPs. He looked at the room, at the bloody scene, at the SEALs standing guard, and then he looked at Jarek. The Admiral's face went white. He stepped forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. Solano, the Admiral whispered. My God, we thought you were dead. Admiral Elias Thorne, father of the operator Kalen, and commander of Naval Special Warfare Group 2, stood in the doorway of the blood-slicked operating room. He was a man carved from granite, his dress uniform pristine, contrasting violently with the carnage of the surgical suite. The silence that followed his whisper was heavier than the storm outside. We buried you, Admiral Thorne said, his voice trembling slightly. 6 years ago, Operation Red Sand. The manifest said everyone on Bird 2 was vaporized. Jarek didn't salute. He didn't snap to attention. He kept his hands at his sides, fingers still curled from the memory of the needle driver. The manifest was wrong, Admiral, Jarek said softly. Just like the intel. Administrator Corinne Voss stepped forward, her heels clicking aggressively on the tile. She was blind to the history filling the room, seeing only liability and insurance premiums. Admiral Thorne, she said, her voice shrill. I am sorry for the chaotic scene. This man, this employee, has held your son hostage in a surgical theater. He is unlicensed. He has assaulted my staff. The police are here to take him into custody. 2 uniformed police officers squeezed past the Admiral, their hands on their holsters. They looked nervous. They were city cops, used to drunks and domestic disputes. Not a room full of Tier 1 operators and a 4-star Admiral. Cuff him, Voss ordered, pointing a manicured finger at Jarek. Don't you touch him, Kalen Thorne roared. The younger Thorne stepped between the police and Jarek, his hand dropping to the tactical tomahawk on his belt. The other 2 operators moved instantly, forming a phalanx around the nurse. Back off, one of the cops shouted, drawing his taser. Step away from the suspect. He's not a suspect, Kalen snarled. He's the only reason there's a pulse in this room. Stand down, Kalen, the Admiral said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Dad, he saved Leo, Kalen argued, not moving. Vane was going to let him bleed out. This man, this chief, he fixed the SMA blind. He saved Leo's life. The Admiral looked at the operating table. He saw the chest rise and fall rhythmically. He saw the color returning to his younger son's face. Then he looked at Dr. Aris Vane. Vane was shrinking into the corner, trying to wipe the blood off his glasses, trying to disappear. Is this true, Doctor? The Admiral asked. Vane stammered. The situation was chaotic. Mr. Solano acted without protocol. He is a nurse, an LPN. He has no surgical privileges. Did he save him? The Admiral pressed, his eyes narrowing. Technically, the bleeding stopped, Vane admitted, his voice barely a whisper. But the liability, the legal precedent, liability, the Admiral repeated, tasting the word like sour milk. He turned back to Jarek. "Chief Warrant Officer Solano," the Admiral said. "Navy Cross. Silver Star with Valor. The finest combat medic to ever wear a trident. And you're scrubbing floors in my city?" The room gasped. Minakovic covered her mouth. Vane's jaw went slack. The janitor who dragged his leg and ate alone in the corner was a ghost legend. "I'm just Jarek now, sir," Jarek said, his eyes cast down. "And I broke the law." "You damn right you did," Voss interrupted, emboldened by the police presence. "Officers, arrest him. I want him out of my hospital. Now." The police moved in again. Kalen stiffened, his muscles coiling to fight. "Kalen," Jarek said. It was a soft command, spoken with the same gravelly tone he'd used to order the scalpel. "Stand down." Kalen looked at Jarek, agony in his eyes. "Chief, they're going to put you in a cage. After what you did, the mission is done," Jarek said. He looked at the boy on the table. "The package is secure. That's all that matters." Jarek stepped forward, limping past the wall of seals. He held his wrists out to the police officers. "I surrender," Jarek said. The officer hesitated, looking at the Admiral, then at the scars on Jarek's arms. Slowly, shamefully, he clicked the handcuffs onto Jarek's wrists. The metal ratcheted tight. Click, click, click. "Jarek Solano," the officer recited, "you are under arrest for assault, battery, and the unauthorized practice of medicine." As they began to read him his rights, Jarek looked up. He didn't look at Voss. He didn't look at the cops. He looked at Vane. "Check his drain output every 15 minutes, Jarek said to the doctor who had mocked him. "If it turns bright red, he's thrown a clot. Don't wait for the labs. Go back in." Vane couldn't meet his eyes. He nodded, a jerky, terrified motion. The police shoved Jarek toward the door. The limp was pronounced now, the adrenaline fading, the pain in his leg a screaming fire. He looked small again, defeated, a criminal being hauled away from the scene of the crime. "Wait." Admiral Thorne stepped into the center of the room, blocking the exit. The officers stopped. "You don't walk through a 4-star, Admiral." Thorne looked at Jarek. He looked at the handcuffs. He looked at the scrubs stained with his own son's blood. "You walked away, Solano," the Admiral said, his voice thick with emotion. "After the village, you disappeared. We needed you. I needed you. I couldn't save them, sir," Jarek whispered, a tear finally cutting through the grime on his cheek. "The kids in the schoolhouse. I couldn't save them. I had to stop the bleeding inside my head." "You saved one tonight," the Admiral said, slowly, with a solemn, ceremonial gravity. The Admiral straightened his back. He snapped his heels together, and in the middle of the wrecked operating room, amidst the blood and the wires and the stunned hospital staff, the Admiral raised his hand. He saluted. It was a slow, sharp, perfect salute. A render of respect from a commander to a subordinate that transcended rank. Kalen Thorne saw it. He snapped to attention and saluted. The other 2 operators snapped to attention, saluted. The room fell into a reverent, holy silence. Jarek stood there, handcuffed, his shoulders slumped. He couldn't return the salute, but his chin lifted. The light returned to his eyes, not the flat, dead stare of the janitor, but the sharp, clear gaze of the chief. He nodded once, a warrior's acknowledgement. "Take him," Voss hissed, breaking the spell, unable to bear the shift in power. "Get him out of here." The police pushed Jarek forward. The Admiral stepped aside, letting him pass, but he didn't lower his hand until Jarek was out the door. As Jarek was marched down the hallway, the hospital staff, nurses, orderlies, patients lined the walls. They had heard the shouting. They had seen the seals. They watched the quiet, limping nurse being led away in chains, but they weren't looking at him like a criminal anymore. Minakovic ran to the door of the OR as Jarek disappeared into the elevator. She turned back to Vane, who was staring at his own hands, trembling. "He's a hero," Mina said, her voice breaking. "And you fired him." Vane looked up. His arrogance was gone, stripped away by the sheer magnitude of what he had just witnessed. He looked at the Admiral, who was now walking toward his son's bedside. "I didn't know," Vane whispered. I didn't know. The Admiral stopped. He didn't look at Vane. He looked at the monitor, beating with the rhythm Jarek had restored. That, the Admiral said coldly, is exactly the problem. You looked at the man, and you didn't see him. You only saw his station. The elevator doors chimed in the distance. Jarek was gone, but the residue of his presence, the blood on the floor, the life on the table, and the shame in the air, was permanent. The storm outside was breaking, but inside Street Jude's, the reckoning had just begun. 3 months later, the rain in the city didn't smell like diesel and ozone anymore. It just smelled like rain. In Trauma Bay 4 at Street Jude's Medical Center, the tiles had been scrubbed clean. The bloodstains from the Admiral's son were long gone, bleached out by industrial chemicals, and the endless cycle of the next shift, the next crisis, the next body. The red phone in the plexiglass box sat silent on the wall, a dormant relic of the night the war came home. Dr. Aris Vane stood over a patient, a construction worker with a compound fracture. The injury was messy, the kind that used to make Vane shout for speed, for silence, for admiration. Pressure is drifting, the new scrub nurse whispered. She was young, terrified, standing in the corner with her hands clutching a suction catheter. She had been on the floor for 3 days. Vane paused. The old Vane would have barked. He would have told her to speak up or get out. He would have made a joke about her competence to the residents. Instead, Vane lowered his hands. He looked at the nurse over the rim of his glasses. "What do you see?" Vane asked quietly. The room froze. The residents exchanged confused glances. Dr. Vane never asked the nurses what they saw. The pulse oximeter is lagging," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger. "But his nail beds are blue. I think the machine is reading false highs. He's hypoxic." Vane looked at the patient's fingers. "Cyanotic," the machine said 98%. The patient was suffocating. "Good catch," Vane said softly. His voice lacked its old polished sheen. It was rougher now, humbled. "Get a gas. Prepare to intubate." He looked at the empty spot near the waste disposal where Jarek Solano used to stand. The ghost of the man was heavier than the man himself had ever been. Vane felt it every time he walked through the double doors. The silence he had mocked was now the only thing he listened for. Administrator Voss had tried to replace Jarek the next day. She had hired 2 bright, loud, efficient techs with perfect resumes. But the rhythm of the ER had broken. The staff moved differently. They walked with a strange, subconscious reverence, checking the corners, listening to the quiet ones. They knew now. They knew that heroes didn't always wear capes or white coats. Sometimes they wore stained scrubs and dragged a bad leg. 5 miles away, on the gritty, industrial edge of the harbor, the Veterans Outreach Clinic was little more than a converted garage with a leaking roof. It smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. Jarek Solano sat on a rolling stool, wrapping the ankle of a homeless Vietnam vet named Silas. The clinic didn't have digital monitors. It didn't have an MRI. It had donated bandages, expired ibuprofen, and Jarek. "Does it hurt when I press here?" Jarek asked, his voice a low rumble. "Like hell, Chief," Silas grunted. "Ligaments are intact," Jarek said, taping the joint with the same, precise, friction lock pattern he had used in the operating room. "Stay off it for 2 days. I mean it, Silas. No walking to the liquor store." "You're a hard man, Solano." Silas chuckled, toothless and weary. "I'm just a nurse," Jarek said. He stood up. The limp was still there. The cane he used now was plain wood, sanded smooth by his own hand. He walked to the sink to scrub up. His hands still had the tremor, the fine vibration of nerve damage and memory. But when he worked, they were still granite. The charges had been dropped. In the interest of justice, the district attorney had said to the press, though everyone knew the order had come from a much higher pay grade. But Jarek hadn't gone back to Street Jude's. He couldn't. The spotlight was a dangerous place for a man trying to forget the sound of helicopters. He preferred this. The concrete floor. The people no one else looked at. The work that didn't require a thank you. A shadow fell across the open bay door of the garage. Jarek didn't turn around. He dried his hands on a paper towel, taking his time. He knew the silhouette. He knew the displacement of air that happened when men of a certain caliber entered a room. "You're hard to find," a voice said. Jarek turned. Kalen Thorne stood in the drizzle. He wasn't in uniform. He wore jeans and a hoodie, looking like any other dock worker, except for the way his eyes constantly scanned the perimeter. Next to him was a young man leaning on a cane. Leo Thorne, the Admiral's son. He was thin, pale, and moved with the stiffness of a body that had been cut open and sewn back together. But he was standing. He was breathing. Jarek leaned back against the sink, crossing his arms over his chest. "I'm not hiding," Jarek said. "I'm working." "We went to the hospital," Leo said. His voice was raspy, the vocal cords still recovering from the tube. "They said you were gone. They said you resigned." "I was fired, kid," Jarek corrected gently. "There's a difference." Leo stepped forward. He looked at the dingy clinic, at the homeless men waiting in the plastic chairs, at the water dripping into a bucket in the corner. Then he looked at Jarek, the man who had reached into his chest and pulled him back from the void. "My father wanted to come," Leo said. "But he thought you wouldn't want the brass. He thought you'd want quiet." "Your father is a smart man," Jarek said. Kalen walked up to Jarek. The size difference was negligible, but the energy was different. Kalen was a sword still in the forge, hot and sharp. Jarek was the anvil, battered, cold, and immovable. "We deployed again next week," Kalen said. "The team, we're going back to the valley." Jarek nodded. "Keep your heads down. Watch the ridge lines. We have a new medic," Kalen said. He reached into his pocket. "He's good, but he's not you." Kalen pulled his hand out. He wasn't holding a medal. He wasn't holding a check. He held out a coin. It was heavy, black, matte metal, beaten and scratched. On one side, the seal trident. On the other, a skull and the number of Jarek's old team. It wasn't a commemorative coin from a gift shop. It was a deployment coin, carried in a pocket through dirt, blood, and fire. "The boys voted," Kalen said, his voice thick. "They want you to have this." It was the medic's, the one we lost on the bird. Jarek looked at the coin. For a long moment, he didn't move. The rain drummed on the tin roof. The ghosts in the room swirled, silent and heavy. To take the coin was to accept the past, to acknowledge that he wasn't just a janitor, wasn't just a nurse, wasn't just a stain on the system. He reached out. His hand trembled, then steadied as his fingers closed over the cold metal. "Tell them." Jarek's voice caught. He cleared his throat, forcing the gravel back into place. "Tell them to check their gear." Twice. "We will, Chief," Kalen said. Leo stepped up. He didn't offer a hand. He did something that stunned the room. He dropped his cane. He wobbled, pain flashing across his face, but he forced himself to stand straight, unsupported, on his own 2 feet. "Thank you," Leo whispered. Jarek looked at the boy standing tall against the gravity that had tried to kill him. "Don't thank me," Jarek said softly. "Just make it count. You got a second round. Don't waste it." Leo nodded, tears welling in his eyes. He picked up his cane. They didn't hug. They didn't salute. There was no applause. Kalen nodded once, a sharp, violent dip of the chin, and turned to guide his brother back to the waiting car. Jarek watched them go. He watched the tail lights fade into the grey mist of the city. He looked down at the coin in his palm. He rubbed his thumb over the raised metal of the trident, feeling the edges, feeling the history. He didn't put it in his pocket. He placed it on the windowsill, next to a jar of tongue depressors. A reminder, a sentinel. "Chief?" Silas called from the chair. "You okay?" Jarek blinked. The mask slid back into place. The shoulders slumped slightly. The limp returned. "I'm fine, Silas," Jarek said, turning back to the room full of broken men who needed him. "Who's next?" He picked up a clipboard. He didn't look like a warrior. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a tired man in a run-down clinic in the forgotten part of town. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Do not judge a person by their title, appearance, or silence. The loudest voice in the room is rarely the strongest, and the hands that clean the floor may be the only ones capable of saving your life. Some heroes do not need an introduction. They just need you to survive. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal the truth beneath the surface.